What is 1 Corinthians 13 often called? The love chapter, that's right. So many of us are familiar with a certain portion of 1 Corinthians 13. We're going to actually look at a passage that comes after the more famous part. 1 Corinthians 13, starting in verse 8. Paul writes, "Love never fails. Prophecies will be done away with, tongues will cease, and knowledge will pass away. For our knowledge is partial and incomplete. Even the gift of prophecy reveals only part of the whole picture. But when the time of completeness, the time of perfection comes, what is partial and incomplete disappears. For in the present we see through a glass in obscurity, but when the time comes we will see face to face. Right now I know in part, but on that day I will know fully, even as I have been fully known." There's a lot in there. Prophetic teachings. I was just going to kind of skip over prophetic teachings and tongues, but I want to come back to that. Don't have time to get into it this morning. But this passage, prophecies will be done away with, tongues will cease. I grew up in a church that had a very confident interpretation of this passage. Tongues were only for the early church. Did anyone grow up with that explanation? Only for the early church. They're done now. And at the time I was like, yeah, that makes sense, until I realized, what about knowledge? It says the same thing about knowledge. Was knowledge only for the early church? Like, we don't need knowledge today? And the church I grew up with was almost obsessed with knowledge. So I'm like, something isn't adding up. So I'm going to come back to prophecy and tongues later on. But the short answer is this. What Paul is saying, in my humble opinion, which is becoming more humble every year, is prophetic teachings, they are temporary. They come into our lives as individuals and as churches, and then they kind of fade away. Then there's a season where we don't have as much prophetic teaching going on. Same as the gift of tongues and other gifts of the Spirit. There seems to be an ebb and flow in the life of both individuals and churches and the church universal, right? So they come and they get, same as knowledge. That doesn't mean they're not important. Doesn't mean they don't have a role in our lives and in churches today. Paul's main point is love isn't like that. Those other things are important, but they're not essential. Love is essential. It's also complete. It has to be the foundation upon which our faith is based. So Paul goes in and he starts talking about our knowledge is partial and incomplete. Much of what we know today, much of what we are convinced is true, we're not going to be so convinced in 2 years or 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, right? Those of you with any amount of life experience, you know this, right? There are things that I was absolutely convinced were true and important and even essential, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that now that's kind of faded and been replaced with different knowledge. Has this happened in your life? Knowledge is temporary. It's temporary. It will pass away. It will be revealed as being wrong or irrelevant. So Paul is saying, don't put your confidence in your knowledge. That's not what you put your confidence in, especially when it comes to your faith. Put your confidence in love. Love never fails, it's timeless, and it's complete now. Love is complete. It's the real deal. It will not pass away, so it needs to be the focus of our faith. Spirituality, it needs to be the focus of our lives if we're following the way of Jesus. And then he says this, when the time of completeness comes, the time of completeness, then what is partial and incomplete will disappear. What does he mean by that? So when our eyes are open to the completeness of reality, all our partial and incomplete knowledge will fade away. It will disappear. Has anyone heard of the story of the three blind men and the elephant? Most people have heard this story. I'll give you a short version for those of you who haven't heard it or need a refresher. So let's say there's four blind men. Let's up our ante here. And they stumble across an elephant. And each of these men is feeling and touching and experiencing a different part of the elephant. So one is, the trunk. Okay, I guess this thing is like a snake. And another one grabs a hold of the tail. Well, snake, that's more like a rope. Another one has the leg of the elephant. A rope, what are you talking about? It's like a tree trunk. And another one has the ear, and it's like, no, it's like a big fan. And they start debating with one another. And what Paul is saying here, that's kind of our knowledge, our biblical and theological knowledge, but also our knowledge of life and reality in general. And when the day of completeness comes, when our eyes are open to the big picture, all of a sudden we'll see, it's an elephant. It's not a rope. It's not a tree. And our partial and incomplete knowledge just fades away in the completeness of the moment of clarity. Now, when is this time of completeness that Paul is talking about? Well, I think he's obviously talking about life after death. All of a sudden our eyes are opened to the completeness of reality, although I think that will be a process as well, but that is speculative, and anyone's opinions on the afterlife are speculative. But I also think Paul is talking about these rare moments in this life where we get these glimpses of the completeness of reality. Spiritual people throughout history have had moments of glimpsing the big picture, and we call these, divine encounters or mystical experiences, or some people would talk about unitive experiences with the divine. But even secular people, using secular language, have had these kinds of moments. I've heard them described as sea change moments, or epiphanies, or aha moments on a universal cosmic scale. Whatever language we give to it, there's just these moments where our eyes are open to the big picture and everything makes sense. Have you ever had one of those moments? One of my agnostic friends, this was back in university, he told me about this time he was with the stars. It was late at night and he's looking at the stars and he says, all of a sudden everything just changes and the stars are no longer stars and I'm no longer me, and I just felt connected to everything. And I can't explain it, but in that moment everything made sense. I had no questions, I had no doubts, all my anxiety and worries, all of that disappeared. Reality made sense. And I felt this peace and this calm come over me. And he said, I don't know if it lasted 5 seconds or if it lasted 5 minutes, but it wasn't that long. But after that moment, I just remember having this awareness that there is a way of looking at reality that makes everything make sense. But my mind can't contain it. He says, I can't remember what I saw or the logic or the reason that made the whole cosmos make sense. But I just remember walking away with this, with this peace, this assurance that there is a way of seeing reality and everything makes sense. Has anyone had one of those moments? And I'm not talking about a moment where we talk about peace that transcends understanding. That's when nothing makes sense, but I still experience the peace of God. Those are amazing moments. We need those. 99.9% of the time, probably higher, 99.99999% of the time, we don't see the big picture. And everything doesn't make sense. We look at Gaza, and we look at Ukraine, we look at the world, we look at our own lives, and we're like, no, it doesn't make sense. That's our mode of existence. If not all the time, this close to all the time. Paul says we go through life looking at reality through an opaque pane of glass. And we see everything in obscurity. What does obscurity mean? The quality of being difficult to understand. That's the lens we see reality through. The reality is difficult to understand with the eyes, with the vision, with the perspective that we have as human beings, finite creatures. In fact, the Greek word that Paul uses here is enigma. What word do you think comes from that Greek word? Enigma, a riddle. That's how we see reality. That's how we see life. That's how we see God. That's how we see other people. That's how we see ourselves. In obscurity. Everything's difficult to understand. At best, Paul says, at best, we have a partial understanding. But when the moment of completeness comes, Paul says, I will know fully. But then he adds this phrase, as I am fully known. And that really jumped out to me. So I spent time with that most of this week. Like, what does that mean? What I think he's saying is, my knowledge and understanding of truth is in proportion to me being known. Your knowledge, your understanding of truth is in proportion to you being known. So your genuine understanding in life is not based on how many books you've read, or how clever you are, or your IQ, or how many facts you are able to retain. Your understanding and wisdom increases as you let yourself be known. It's very interesting to me. And there's something here. So I dug in. Okay, what does it mean to be fully known? First of all, God knows me fully. God knows you fully. We are all fully known, right? That's not what Paul is talking about. Paul is talking about the experience of being fully known. To be aware that you are known fully. Even the parts of you that you don't want to know, that you kind of ignore, that you suppress, that you repress, all those other words. All of it. That God knows you fully, all your complexities and contradictions and the good and the bad and the ugly and the totality of your shadow. God knows you fully, and you are fully loved. As you experience this, you grow in your knowledge, genuine knowledge of life, of God, of the world, reality, other people. As you experience being fully known. I think being fully known is what transforms us and sets us free. Think of friendship. C.S. Lewis, I love this. He says, the beginning of friendship is when two people meet and both people say, what, you too? I thought I was the only one. That's the beginning of friendship. When someone sees you, like really sees you, the real you, that in and of itself is almost a miracle. But more than that, they not only see you, really see you, but they get you. That's rare. That's rare. That's a precious gift. I can't think of a gift much more precious than that in life. To be seen, to be noticed, and to be understood. This is what we desire, I think, most. In fact, Tim Keller, pastor, author, passed away last year. He says, to be loved but not known is comforting, but it's superficial. Oh, you love me, but you don't really know me, so it's pretty easy to love someone you don't really know, right? He says, to be known and not loved, well, that's our greatest fear. But to be fully known and truly loved is what we need more than anything. I agree. Absolutely. And not only is it what we need more than anything, Paul is saying the more we experience that, being fully known and being fully loved, that's when we truly begin to understand reality, life, God, other people, ourselves. This is very fascinating to me because I am My whole life, I've been in pursuit of wisdom and truth and knowledge. At times, obsessed with it. I studied philosophy, and this is a bit of a game changer. That if I really want wisdom, if I want true knowledge, I can't obtain that without experiencing and letting myself be fully known. Wow. That changes my methodology and priorities a little bit. 1 Corinthians 13 is such an interesting passage. There's so much, it sometimes blows my mind how much is in, like 500 words, 750 words. It's mind-blowing. It almost makes you wonder if some of it's inspired, We know more fully as we are more fully known. So he's implying there's a relationship between the two. Genuine knowledge, genuine understanding, genuine wisdom is actually the byproduct of us being known. So pursuing genuine knowledge and wisdom and understanding, it's kind of like pursuing happiness. There's a lot of evidence that's come out that chasing after happiness is not going to bring you happiness. If happiness is your goal, not going to happen. Happiness is a byproduct of pursuing other things. That's another message to talk about that. But it's the same with genuine wisdom and knowledge. It's not a byproduct of pursuing wisdom and knowledge. It's a byproduct of pursuing other things. And what Paul is telling us is what we need to pursue is to experience being fully known and fully loved. And that starts, obviously, in our relationship with God. And that sounds like a no-brainer. Of course, we all do that. I don't think we do. I'm not sure how self-aware we all are. I'll just be honest, and I'm myself included. I'm 51 years old, and it blows my mind as I continue to age that things will be revealed to me that are so obvious. I mean, they've been obvious to Tammy for a while, and yet they're new revelations to me. Oh, wow. And I swear I'm not dumb. I'm on the fence now. I used to be quite convinced I'm quite intelligent and clever. I'm now on the fence. Am I dumb? A little bit, maybe, in certain areas. But how could I not notice it? And I'm not the only one, right? Like Jesus is saying there's a whole log in your own life that you haven't observed and taken care of and dealt with. And yet we're so good at seeing little speck in other people's lives. So as we become, this is the risk of it. Even to be fully known by God means we have to experience that. We're already fully known by God, but to experience it is to become aware of the fullness, the totality, the completeness of who we really are. To become aware of that, we have to become aware of that to experience God being aware of that and loving us anyways. Like, it's very interesting. We can only experience the healing and the transformation and the grace of God in the areas of our lives that we sort of expose to the light of God. It's so interesting that the things that, our shame and our wounds and all that stuff, the stuff that we keep in the shadows is what we need most. That's where we need healing. And yet that's what we don't expose to the light of God. Because we're afraid. We've all been hurt and burnt and we're all proud. It's very humbling to start really owning some of those truths about ourselves. But until we do that, we can't really have genuine knowledge and understanding about anything, Paul is saying. We know more fully as we are known more fully. It's amazing how many strong opinions we have about everything out there. It's so much easier to be confident in our opinions on what's going on out there. In fact, I think this is true. This is speculative. Most of what I'm saying is. But the person that is most confident in their opinions about reality out there, I think they are probably the least wise. Because I subscribe to Jesus' teachings, and I subscribe to the teachings of people like Socrates. And Socrates said, wisdom is directly proportional to your awareness of your own ignorance. And if you know it all, well, you don't even know the first step to wisdom, which is that you don't know everything. In fact, you don't know much. Humility. Anyone who doesn't possess humility, I don't think can be wise. I think one of the main points and purposes of the church is that we are supposed to be a place, a community, where people can come. And not only is it our intent to be known fully by God, but to slowly be known by one another. There's not many places you can do that. But unfortunately, the reputation of the church, and I think we've earned it. I don't think it's an unfair reputation, but for many people, the last place that they would go and sort of risk being known by strangers, by other people, the last place is the church for a lot of people. Why? Because I'll be judged. Yet that is one of our primary purposes, is to be a community where we can slowly experience not only God knowing us fully, but letting one another know us more fully, and knowing that we are loved, even in our complexities and contradictions. It's very healing. Very healing. Why has the church not been this? Many, many reasons. One reason, I think, is this. It's what Paul's talking about. For some reason, we've become obsessed with conceptual knowledge. Conceptual knowledge. Studying the Bible, theological precepts, and knowing what is right and true and just. And that has its place, obviously. But it can't be the foundation of our faith. Because Paul's saying it's partial and incomplete. Love has to be the foundation of our faith because it's the only thing that is complete and whole. It's like if our knowledge is the foundation of our faith, it's kind of like insisting that the elephant is the tree trunk. Like that's what we have, is a bunch of churches insisting, no, it's like a rope. No, are you mad? It's like a snake. None of us know. Our knowledge is partial and incomplete, and to insist that's like building a building and having the foundation be something that will erode quickly with water. Love doesn't pass away. Love never fails. Paul's saying make love the foundation of your faith. And knowledge, this is interesting. We've confused, and it's odd that the church has confused this. Confused genuine knowledge with conceptual knowledge. In the Bible, to know is to become intimate with. To know is to become intimate with. To know God is to become intimate with God. To know a subject is to experience intimacy with that. That's how we know. It's much deeper and more complete than conceptual knowledge. So to just conceptually know that God loves you, which most of us do, right? It's insufficient. That's not genuine knowledge. That will fade with certain experiences in life. But to know in a biblical sense, to become intimate with this reality that God loves you, that changes everything. And that's true knowledge. Carl Jung. I think I've said this before, but the top 5 influential thinkers in my life, in my own spiritual journey, Carl Jung's in the top 5. Maybe the top 3. Jesus is number 1. Maybe some of you have seen this. It's going around social media, this interview with Carl Jung. And the interviewer asks him, when you were young, did you believe in God? And he says, oh, yes. Do you believe in God now? And his face, that's what gets me. His face, you see this glow. The look in his eyes. And then he says, oh, that's not an easy question to answer. Because I know. I don't have to believe. And that's what Paul is talking about. This, and so many Christians say that, right? Because it's easy to just say something that we think sounds good and true, and we convince ourselves that we've actually experienced it. I don't have to believe in God anymore. I know God. But so many Christians say that, but they're still talking about conceptual knowledge. In fact, if they don't have that look in their eye that Carl Jung has, that glow, that softness, that tenderness, that radiance, like Moses' face, that's when you have met God, when you've become intimate with the presence of God. Charles Wesley and George Whitefield, two of the most brilliant revivalists in the 1700s. I mean, and they were brilliant. They studied at one of the most prestigious schools in the world at the time and in the world today, Oxford. They met in Oxford and they started a little club called the Holy Club. And they were good friends. They're passionate for God and lit on fire for God and went out and like I said, they became two of the great revivalists in the 1700s. As they got older and learned more, they started to part ways. In fact, they got to the point where they had some heated confrontations, and they actually broke fellowship. In fact, there was accusations of heresy. In fact, one of George Whitefield's students said, "Isn't it a shame we won't see John and Charles Wesley in heaven?" This is how, when we disagree, that's what can happen, right? When we disagree, theology and our understanding of the Bible. Later on, much later on, late in Charles Wesley's life, he wrote a letter to George. He said this: "We loved more when we knew less. We loved more when we knew less." I feel the same way. I think it breaks God's heart when we just keep splitting and separating over our knowledge. I know this is true, and I'm sorry. We love more when we know less. I would change that. We love more when we become aware that we know far less than we think we do.
Grew up with the sun on my face, dreams in my pocket, and laughter in the air. I had a family whose love built a foundation, a rock I could stand on. And though they're miles away tonight, I know they're right here with me. And I know what it means to be wanted. And I feel what it is to be just who I am. I see all the wonders around me, and I know what it is to be loved. Each night I lie in my bed, safe in the arms of an angel. Her face, her hair, her skin, her eyes, her touch, her smile, those lips, how they cover me with kisses. And they whisper my name, and I know what it means to be wanted. And I feel what it is to be just who I am. I see all the wonders around me, and I know what it means to be loved. What it means to be loved. Oh, I stood at the foot of a cross, covered in blood, a hammer in my hand. I spat on the face of a man who'd done nothing but love me, nothing but love me. And with his final words he begged, Father, forgive him. And I know what it means to be wanted. I feel what it is to be just who I am. I see all the wonders around me, and I know. And I know what it means to be wanted. And I feel what it is to be just who I am. I see all the wonders around me, and I know what it is to be loved. What it is to be loved. What it is to be. What it is to be loved. What it is to be. What it is to be loved. What it is to be.